Hello and welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk to real lawyers about their lives in and out of the practice of law, how they got to be lawyers, and what their experience has been. I'm Goodman, the host of the show, and yes, I'm a lawyer. Nobody's perfect. Today we're going to do something a little different on Love Thy Lawyer. I'm talking with attorney David Lim, and David and I have something in common. And we both ran for judge a few years ago, not against each other in different campaigns. And since it's election season, and since we have a judicial race, I thought it would be interesting to talk to David about his experience running for judge, and I would talk to him about my experience about running for judge, and we would make a podcast out of it. So with that, David, when did you first start thinking about being a judge?
Well, Lewis, I want to first thank you for having me on the podcast and reopening old wounds. I think, it's a lot of fun to have to relive, some of your defeats as a lawyer. But all kidding aside, you and I always joke that we belong to a very elite club of good lawyers who didn't win their judicial races.
And let me say this, welcome back to Love Thy Lawyer, because we've had you on and we did a very successful interview with you a month or two ago. So thank you for coming back.
Well, it's great to be back. I was honored to be asked back. But to answer your question, I ran for judge in 2016, and I'd been thinking about it probably for, probably 3 or 4 years before that. How about you? When did you start thinking about running for judge?
Well,
when did you run?
I ran in 2010, and I'd never really thought about running for judge. I'd put in an application because, years ago, when I first left the DA's office, I was very good friends with John Perchio, who was a retired Alameda County judge, and he sort of put the notion in my head that it was something that I should aspire to and that I should do and that I should work on. So I did that, and I put in my application with Gray Davis, and I was essentially kind of informally promised that I would get an appointment in Gray Davis's second term. However, as we all know, Gray Davis didn't really even manage to finish his first term. So there went my judicial aspirations, and a lot of politicking kind of down the drain. So what happened with me is in late 2009, it was before Christmas, I know that, Judge Hashimoto, Roy Hashimoto, called me into his chambers, and he said, there's going to be a judicial opening. I think that you should run for it. And so that's what got me started thinking about running. And I thought about it, and I turned it over in my mind. I talked to my family and decided, okay, this was something that I was going to do. So that's how I got started. What about you?
Yeah. So, in 2016, I was still working for the district attorney's office in Alameda County, but I sort of had a side job where I was an elected member of the San Mateo City Council. I'd been elected in 2009. I had won my second term in 2013. So I had come off of 2 successful campaigns where I, won election and retained my seat as a city council member. And kind of like you, in 2016, I'd always thought about becoming a judge. I'd never kind of gone through with the application process. But in 2016, there were 2 open seats, actually 3 open seats. And that was unheard of at the time. I mean, we had 3 judges who were retiring and letting their seats go open to election. And so the governor wasn't going to fill those spots. And so there was a lot of buzz in the county about who was going to run for those 3 seats. And I remember the weekend before the filing deadline, there was still no clear notion of who was going to run. And people started to tell me, hey, you should put in your name. You're a politician. You've won elections before. You know how to campaign. Maybe if you get in there, people will decide not to run against you. And, we think you'd be a good judge. And so people were encouraging me to do it. And I remember sitting, I think it was the Monday or Tuesday before the filing deadline, and my kids were in school. But for whatever reason, my wife and I had a day off. And so we went and got breakfast together, which with 3 young kids is almost unheard of. And we were sitting there over breakfast burritos and tater tots. And we thought, you know what the heck? We've always been open for an adventure. And she says, you like the law. You've always thought about being a judge. Why don't you put your name in? What's the worst that can happen? As we thought. And so, we did it. And that leads me into my next story, but I want to ask you a question. So what was your filing deadline like? I mean, did you have a campaign staff? What did you kind of plan out your strategy for how you were going to file and then how you were going to run the campaign?
Yeah, well, unlike you, I'd never run for office. So I had no experience whatsoever with running or filing. It was completely new to me, setting up a bank account. So I hired a professional, who runs campaigns and talked. I remember having this meeting with them, and they just kind of told me what to do, and so I did it, and it was frightening. I remember going down to the basement of the courthouse where the elections office is, and there were all these people down there who were filing for different offices around the county, for supervisor, for city council elections. And I was just so like really frightened, I have to say. And so I remember that day very, very clearly. And I also remember it being pretty expensive. I had to write a check in order to get the ballot statement printed. And I don't know, it was like about $17,000, $18,000. So it just seemed like a lot of money. I think it's even more now.
Yeah, I remember that too. And, in hindsight, I actually paused because I did not know the filing fee was that expensive, because in San Mateo County, when I ran for council, they base the fee based on the number of voters in your election. And because a judicial race is a countywide election, yeah, it was up there. I remember it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. And, thinking back in hindsight, I should have just put my checkbook back in my pocket and walked away. That was kind of the first notion that maybe I hadn't thought this through as well as I should have, because it was a lot of money. I mean, for council, I probably paid maybe $1,000 or a couple $1,000, but it was not so cost prohibitive. The other thing I'll tell you is, I don't know, did you know who your opponents were going to be when you went down to file, or were you still sort of in the dark as to who was going to come out of the woodwork and run against you?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I knew at the time that I filed who else was going to file. I just don't remember.
Yeah. I remember because we had 3 seats, and Margaret Fujioka, now Judge Fujioka, had
Right.
laid the groundwork for a run a year before. So she had all the endorsements lined up, and she had a campaign staff all ready to go. And so nobody was going to challenge her. My friend Jennifer Madden, who was in the DA's office with me at the time, now Judge Madden, was going to run for another seat. And she had an opponent whose name I can't now remember, but a nice lawyer, I think out of Livermore, Pleasanton area. And then there was a 3rd seat, and I had no idea who was going to be in my 3rd seat, and I had no intel. I didn't hear about anything. But as it turns out, Barbara Thomas, who you and I know is a defense attorney and a nice lady, nice attorney, and Scott Jackson, who was my former colleague in Alameda County DA's office, and at that time was working, I believe, either for Golden Gate Law School or a law firm or both. And he's now Judge Jackson. He ended up winning. They ended up filing. And I joked with both of them after the fact that if they had managed to catch me down there just before I wrote that check, it wouldn't have taken much for them to convince me not to write that check. If they had said, hey, we're running, because I admire both of them. I think Barbara's a very good lawyer, and Scott is an excellent jurist now. If either one of them had caught me at that door, and then I had heard how much it was to pay that filing fee, I probably would have said, you know what, good luck, you guys. You can go fight this out, and maybe I'll put my application in. Maybe I'll run some other time. But I think I would have walked away. And I think I told that to them. And I think Scott laughed. And I think Barbara thought I was making fun of her, which I wasn't. I was very serious. I said, I could have used that money to buy a car or something. I didn't need to be out here with you guys hitting the campaign trail. I've done all that before. So I do remember that. I wish I had known beforehand that they were going to run.
Well, Barbara had prior electoral experience as well. She had been on the city council for the city of Alameda and had run for that office and had been elected.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. So yeah, so that was even more reason for me not to, jump in that race. And, Scott and I were friends and we remained friends. And, after the fact, we sort of laughed at each other saying, we could have saved each other some heartache. So how did your campaign go? Did you do any studying? Did you read any books on how to campaign, or did you just lean on your consultant?
I read a couple of books. One was a book that my consultant had written about how to run a campaign and things to do. And I don't know, I think a lot of these things are somewhat more geared to people who are running for school board or for city council rather than a judicial race. But yeah, I read that book. And then Don Squires gave me a book. He was very much in my corner, and he gave me a book as well on, how to campaign and that sort of thing. And I thought that there was some good information in both of those books, but I was really such a babe in the woods in terms of politics. And then I started raising money too. And I was aware of what it was going to cost to run this thing. And I mean, just to be very straight about it, I think I spent about $150,000 on my campaign, and I raised about half of that, and about the other half was my own money.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a cheap thing. I've heard of other candidates who I won't name because we don't have their permission, but other people who could join our club, Lewis, of good lawyers who didn't win judicial campaigns, have told me how much they've spent, and it is a little mind-boggling. I'll tell you, and I'm not gloating, I'm not making fun of you. My wife and I agreed that we were going to put a very strict limit on the amount of money that we spent on the campaign. And I think I have the benefit of having been an elected before. I sort of had the self-discipline to know not to mortgage my house. And, I have 3 kids who are still very young. None of them are in college yet. So I have, their long-term financial well-being to think of. And so we had a $10,000 cap on personal expenditures for the campaign, that we agreed I wasn't going to spend more than $10,000 of our own money. And I blew that in the campaign's finance statement. Like, it was right out the door. It was gone.
Right.
After that, I was like, okay, I guess I better, raise money.
Well, I just couldn't believe how expensive these things were, like the signs and the printings and everything required that it have a union bug on it. And it was just, amazing to me how expensive it was. We also ran some TV advertising, and it was just a lot of money. And I had it budgeted. I had the money. I didn't take a second on my house. And, so, it was, I went into it with eyes wide open as far as the money is concerned.
Yeah. So how did you feel during the campaign? Did you have a good time doing it? Was it grueling for you?
There were parts of it that were really fun and really interesting. There were certain events that I went to that just worked, and they were just fun, and they were good, and the people were fun, and sometimes the other candidates would be there, and sometimes they weren't there. It was fun going out and meeting a lot of people and just seeing these places and these venues that I'd really never been before, like the Hayward Democratic Club or the MGO Club in Oakland, or there's this, I don't know, maybe you've been there. There's some Democrats that meet at the Humanist Hall in downtown Oakland. And then I don't know how many Rotary meetings I went to, and Kiwanis meetings and lunches and breakfasts and those sorts of things. Some of them were really fun, but some of them were also just really grueling. I thought that the schedule was brutal, that every morning I had some breakfast to go to, every lunch I had some lunch to go to, every evening I was out at an event, and then I'd be making phone calls, dialing for dollars, and also trying to keep my law practice going. So it was a difficult time for me. A lot of my campaign, it seemed, took place in January, February, March. And it seemed to me that it was raining all the time.
Maybe that was a symbolism for how you actually felt, Louis. Maybe it wasn't really raining. It was just in your heart that it was raining.
Maybe. How about you? What was your take on, the campaign?
Better prepared. And I guess I was, because I had campaigned before, but I'd never done a countywide campaign. And then,
it's big. It's big, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. And then here's the thing that I don't think our listeners realize, even some of our lawyer listeners, that when you run for judge, it is not like any other political campaign. So I'd run for city council, and that's a more traditional political race where you can make promises like, I'm going to clean up the streets, I'm going to, make our parks better, and everybody's going to get a garbage can, a bigger garbage can, so you can throw away more trash and keep your streets cleaner. You can make those sorts of crazy promises as a council member, because you're running for office. But when you run for judge, you have to sign an oath that you will abide by the judicial rules of conduct, which means you have to start acting judicial, which means you cannot prejudge any issue. You can't state opinions about things, because that's not the role of a judge. And so I found the judicial campaign to be incredibly boring, because you couldn't take a position on anything. People would ask you, what's your view on the death penalty? What's your view on the 3 strikes laws? What's your take on our drug treatment programs? And you're only allowed to say, if elected, I will be fair and impartial. I will look at each case on its merits, and I will do my best to uphold the law, right? Basically, that's all you could say. And
it's all you can say.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so, I towards the end of the campaign, I would be sitting around with the other candidates at, whatever function we were at, and we'd be all like, why are we here? We could just send one of us, and, one person could say, on behalf of all the candidates, we would be fair and impartial. We'll follow the law, and we will not prejudge any issue, because all of us were extremely ethical. And, even though you have moments of them being your competitors and you definitely want to win, I can say, and I don't think I'm looking through rose-colored glasses, I had fun with my opponents, with Barbara and Scott. We didn't go at each other's throats, and we never sunk low. We did what we needed to do to win. But you're sort of limited to what you could say and do. And it almost became humorous. And I thought, this is goofy. This is a really goofy way to run a campaign. And I almost stressed out, because in addition to running the campaign, I was still, a deputy district attorney during the daytime. So I had my, court obligations and obligations to the people of the state of California. But then you remember, I was also a council member. So I was doing my council meetings. I had constituents to take care of here in San Mateo. And so I was out a lot. That just about broke me, because there was almost too much on my plate, where I thought, I may have bitten off more than I can chew. But I think it's really not being able to really flesh out where you stand on things that makes judicial races sort of goofy.
Yeah, I really agree. Did you have any sort of like go-to people? I mean, I had a couple of real kind of go-to people, like if a question or a problem came up, or just some people who I would talk to on a regular basis, because I have to say that I found the whole thing to be really kind of a lonely experience.
I think I had one up on you there, Louis, where because I was in the political game for a while, I knew people in politics. So I knew some of the members of the Democratic Club. I knew people from the unions, and those were good friends who would give me intel on what they thought about things. And I had a friend who was a consultant, and she helped me, and I hired her to do a little bit of work just to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow in terms of being organized. So, I was in the political game, and so I kind of liked that whole political gossip thing. So I found that to be interesting. I mean, I met some wonderful people as well. So yeah, I didn't find it as lonely, I think, but because I had already been around at that point, I'd been on the council for 7 years, and I'd been on some regional boards. So I sort of knew some people, but I get what you say. I mean, you go into a room and you don't know half the people or less than half the people. And, people come up to you and you're trying to keep track of, the 100th person you've met in that particular day. And it can get quite lonely.
So there's a guy, as a matter of fact, he's on the ballot this November. His name is Chris Peoples, and he's the AC Transit, I don't know, at-large representative on AC Transit. And Chris and I knew each other from law school, from Hastings, a million years ago. And I would call him, and he'd always pick up the phone. He'd always pick up the phone for me, and I would, run something past him, and he would tell me what to do, what to think, what was really going on. And it was just so helpful. And I got to say, my sister was someone who I would talk to during the campaign, and she would always listen to me and give me some advice, and that was always helpful. And there were a couple other people who were just really kind of came out of the woodwork for me that I never really had much experience with them before, but they just came out and they were really there for me. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciated those people, because a lot of it to me, I felt like I was like living in this bubble, like this kind of plexiglass bubble that the campaign stuff was there, and I could see the rest of the world out there doing things, but I had no ability to participate in it because I was so busy doing this judicial campaign. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. It's sort of almost like an out-of-body, otherworldly experience sometimes.
Yes.
And in the moment, you're so busy, worried about a million different things, you don't kind of have time to step back. And I think it's only after you've done the journey that you realize, wow, that was kind of weird. There's a lot of weird things going on there.
Yeah.
And everything comes together. Now, how did you do with, there's a number of organizations that everyone knows that endorse candidates, like Sierra Club, the unions, the newspapers, Democratic Party, or the various political parties. How did you do with those? Did you fill out all the questionnaires, those long questionnaires, and did you go do the interviews, and how did that work?
I did. I filled out the questionnaires. I had someone who was very helpful to me in explaining how you fill out those questionnaires, because like the Sierra Club would ask you these questions about CEQA. I can't even remember what it stands for anymore, but it has to do with land use regulations. And I remember getting asked questions about that. And I remember the union people asking me questions about these kind of esoteric union questions. And I was thinking, I don't know. I'm running for judge because I think that I'm a pretty good, pretrial guy. I know how to pre-try drunk driving cases, and I know how to get through a preliminary hearing, and I could listen to both sides and make a bail request, something intelligent around that. But these things were just stuff that was like so out of the blue to me. But I learned, and I did okay with them. I did get the union endorsement, and I got the endorsement of the newspaper, of the East Bay Times. I guess it was the Oakland Trib at the time, but that whole Tribune, East Bay Times, all of at the time, I don't know, there were a whole bunch of them. The Argus and the Hayward Review, and if you got one, you got them all. Yeah. And I remember that editorial coming out and just think, oh my God, this is the greatest thing in the world. And then I heard that getting the endorsement of that newspaper, it was sort of the kiss of death, that any judicial candidate who got the endorsement never won.
It's funny. I got the endorsement as well. So I think we've proven that.
Congratulations.
But we've proven the point that getting the East Bay Times endorsement is basically the kiss of death. That it's just another nail in the coffin of print media basically being dead in this country. And I'm kidding to all my friends who work in print media. But I got their endorsement. So we've proved that you should not seek the East Bay Times endorsement if you're running for judge. Or maybe they just take good lawyers, and it doesn't always mean that just because you're a good lawyer, there could be other good lawyers who will win the election and not you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the three of us who ran were all qualified, and Vicky Kolakowski was the person who ultimately prevailed. And I've been in front of her any number of times, and she's always been very pleasant to me, very fair with me, and very frankly, in my view, she's very fair with everybody. So, I mean, I think she's done a good job and brought a very unique perspective that I certainly couldn't have to the bench. And the other person who was running in that campaign is one of our old colleagues from the DA's office, John Creighton. And John and I have certainly remained friends, although he's retired from the DA's office now, and I don't see him very often. I'll tell you one thing that I found difficult, but it was just something I noticed myself doing, was just having to be nice to everybody. I'm like pretty nice to everybody anyway, but there was this. It was just always having to be nice to everybody.
Yeah. And you know what? It's funny that you say that, Louis, because I'll tell this to your listeners, because you're normally the host. And so not a lot of times we don't get to interview you, Louis. And so you're the one that's asking the questions. All the listeners who are listening to this podcast should know that Louis Goodman has a reputation for being a very good lawyer and a very good advocate for his clients on both sides of the aisle. But people who don't know him should also know that he enjoys a reputation in Alameda County of being one of the nicest lawyers. I mean, you really are, Louis. People always sing your praises about how you always come in, you're always positive, you always got a smile on your face. We could be having a horrific case where we've got to just, beat on each other, to advocate for our sides, but you will always stop to ask somebody how their day was, how their weekend was. So for you to admit that it's tough in a campaign to have to be nice 24/7 is very telling about just sort of how much of a grind a campaign is. And I'm not nearly as nice as you. I mean, I like to think I'm a respectful person, but if I get tired and I think someone's being a fool, I'm not afraid to tell them. So that's a big reveal for you, Louis.
Did you put up lawn signs or anything like that?
I wasted a lot of money on some lawn signs, and I ended up not putting up very many of them. And the main reason I didn't put them up is I have a huge pet peeve. I do not like candidates who put up lawn signs and then don't take them down after the election. And so I kind of chose principle over practicality. My campaign consultant was saying, oh, we've got to put up signs. And I've got a guy and he'll go throw them up along the BART tracks. He'll throw them up down on International Boulevard. He'll go out to Livermore and throw them out on the, on-ramps and off-ramps. And I said, no, I don't want to do that unless, we're going to pay him to take them down. And she said, nobody cares about that. And I said, well, I care. It just bugs the living crap out of me. I do not like candidates who work so hard to get their name out there. And when the election is over, those things become like an eyesore for months, if not years. I was just driving down the street and I saw a campaign sign from the primaries back in March pre-pandemic, and it's still sitting on the corner. And I keep telling myself one day I'm going to just stop my car and yank that thing out because it just bugs me so much. So I didn't put up that many signs. I know it was a waste of money. I gave them to a lot of friends to put out in front of their houses. But I realized in a countywide election, the use of signs, unless you basically paper the entire county, it's not going to have much utility. I like the fact that you did TV ads. Did you do a lot of sign adage as well, or did you do a billboard or bus stop or anything like that?
No billboards, no bus stops. We did a lot of lawn signs. Individuals who volunteered to put up a sign in front of their house. And whenever I would drive by somebody's house and they had a Louis Goodman for judge sign up, it always made me feel really good to see it. But yeah, we did TV. That was interesting. I really enjoyed that. I somehow talking in front of a camera, microphone and stuff. I kind of like that, obviously. And I thought that the TV ad really, really came out quite well. And I enjoyed doing it. We did it on the steps of the Alameda County Courthouse downtown, and then a little bit around Lake Merritt. And we had some professional voiceover and some music, and it was great. It ran on like Fox News and CNN and the cable news channels.
That's pretty impressive for a judicial race, because most people who don't know, again, if you've not run a campaign, running media ads like a TV ad in a judicial race is very unusual and good for you. I mean, it means you worked really hard because number one, they're expensive. And number two, for down ticket races like a judicial race where you have a lot of other stuff above you on the ballot, which is why it's called a down ticket race, it's hard to get any sort of traction. And so a TV ad is really a nice way to get your name out there. Now, I don't remember. Did you finish in the top two and go on to a runoff against Judge Kolakowski?
No. I was out in June.
Yeah, me too. I was out. So tell me about that experience. Let's trade stories and let people know what goes on in the candidate's head on election night. Where were you? Did you have a party with friends and family? Did you do the whole thing at a restaurant with caterers? And what did you do? And how did you feel when the results came in?
We were at my sister's house in Piedmont, and there were, I don't know, maybe 30 people there. And as the results came in, we just kept checking it, and it was quite obvious that I was coming in third. And as the night wore on, it just became quite obvious that I wasn't going to win. And I remember just going outside, and by then the rain had stopped, and it was just beautiful. It was a beautiful evening. It was warm. It was in June, and I just kind of went out by myself and just kind of like took a walk around the block, and thought, well, okay, that's it. This is this is over. And I felt okay about that. I had really given it my all. I'd done everything that I possibly could have. It wasn't my night.
Yeah.
And I was kind of okay with that, really. And then the next morning, I made 3 phone calls. I called Victoria and congratulated her. I called John and I congratulated him. And I called Hawaiian Airlines and I made a reservation for my wife and myself to go to Maui about 10 days later. And we spent, week and a half or whatever over there doing some kiteboarding. And that was kind of a great way to end it.
That really is. Did you sleep like 16 hours the day after the campaign was over? They say people do that. People run campaigns, and then within the first 48 hours of the election being over, you'll kind of just go comatose for literally like 16 to 18 hours and just pass out.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I can't say that I really remember. I'm not a great sleeper as it is. If I get 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night, I'm in great shape. So I don't remember having some really long sleep experience, but I don't know. And then did your campaign get audited at all?
Yeah, we did. I think it's a matter of law. I think under the FPPC guidelines, all judicial campaigns get audited just because of the nature of the office. Did you get audited?
Yeah. And we came out to the penny, thanks to my secretary, Tracy Harvey, who I give credit to at the end of all these podcasts. But she was my treasurer and just did a phenomenal job. I remember this woman, very nice woman, came from Sacramento, and she sat in my conference room with all the books and stuff. And she was here the whole day looking at stuff. And at the end of the day, I mean, she just gave us a clean bill of health, and really the books came out to the penny, which kind of shocked me because there's no way I could have done that. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes you realize why people don't run for office. People say, well, how come more people who are interested don't run for office? And well, it's really a difficult, expensive proposition. It's given me a great deal of respect for anybody who runs for any office whatsoever, regardless of what their political persuasion might be.
Yes, absolutely. We talk about amongst elected officials or people who have even run for elected office that there is a certain amount of respect that you give to people who've put themselves out there, put themselves in the arena. And do you feel that, Louis? Like, you should be proud that you put yourself out there. And even though you didn't win, you should take a measure of pride in, when people complain and whine about how bad our society is and how things aren't going well, don't you have a place in your heart that kind of quietly is, well, I did my part. I got out there. I tried to make a difference. I stood for something, and I put myself out in front of the public, and stood for election to try to change things. Do you ever feel that?
Yeah, I do. And I take it upon myself in any election that I care about to try and do something meaningful, whether it's, writing a check, because I realize how meaningful it is to the candidate to get some money and, perhaps make some phone calls, write some postcards, whatever it might be. But I just recognize how important that is to any campaign, even a low-level campaign like running for judge in Alameda County. It's an important, very important job, obviously. But as far as the ballot is concerned, it's considered very much of a down ballot race.
Yeah. So, do you have any regrets about running?
I don't. I don't have any. There's hardly anything in my life that I've done that I have regrets about. I see everything as a learning experience. The one thing that I would really do differently if I had to do it again is I would not have closed my campaign account. I would not have stopped campaigning, and I would have jumped into the next election and run for the next open seat. Because and that's the advice that I give people who ask me about it now. I say, be prepared to do it twice. And I think that, Victoria Kolakowski did that, and she got elected. She lost first, and then she learned from whatever mistakes she made, and she ran a very effective campaign, and she won. And Judge Hayashi, same thing there. He ran and lost the first time, and then ran again and won. So I think that the only regret I have is that I didn't recognize that I should just keep going.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I never thought about that. For me, I sort of knew. So the one thing I didn't tell you is my wife and I had decided that I wasn't going to run for re-election to city council, that I was going to stop after 2 terms to spend more time with the family and just do one job as opposed to 2 jobs. And so this was sort of a no fault campaign. I figured, well, if I don't win, I still got a good job. And, if I win, then great. I get to be a judge, which is something I've been interested in for a long time. But it was a little disappointing that it was my last campaign, because I already knew in my heart that I wasn't going to run for another campaign, and I was kind of divesting myself from politics. So it was a little bummer to go out not winning. But on the other hand, I thought, well, I've won 2, lost 1, so I'm still above 500, so I can retire from politics with a winning record, and that's not so bad. So that was fine.
Would you encourage other people to run for judge?
I'm not sure that I would, because I think if you want to be a judge, I think the better route is to put your name in for appointment and see where that takes you. I think running for judge is such a crapshoot because, as we've talked about a number of times or alluded to in this podcast, it's a down ticket race. I think if you honestly ask most people, most voters about a judicial race, the majority of them are going to say they know nothing about the candidates.
Well, David, it's been fun talking to you and opening up the old wounds of the past. And I wish both of the candidates who are running right now good luck. And I think that looking at the election coming up, it's going to be interesting on a lot of levels.
Yep, I wish them both the best. I know one of the 2 candidates, but my heart certainly goes out to both of them. It sounds like they're working really hard. And, whoever wins, I think will be a good judge. So good luck to both of them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, good talking to you, David, and see you soon.
Thanks.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. Many thanks to my guests who have contributed their time and wisdom and make this show possible. Thanks as always to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
I hope Judge Madden and Judge Jackson don't get too angry, but this is all public knowledge.